Welcome to the FNDN Series, your deep dive into startup compensation with industry leaders from across the startup world. Join me, Matt McFarlane, a people operations leader turned compensation specialist, as we uncover the strategies and practices driving success in tech startups around the world. Hear insights from heads of people, founders, and experts as we explore how to build robust compensation frameworks that not only fuel growth and retention, but do so in the dynamic startup environment that we all know and love. Let's get into it. All right, Shirley, welcome back. Episode 2. We're not going to leave people hanging for too long. We're talking about how to take product-led principles from theory to practice. How do we actually start to think about embedding some of these principles in our people team? Now, I'm sure most people are hanging off the last episode. Where we left things off was this concept of how to get buy-in. How do we sort of get how do we get the founder, how do we get the executive team to actually see the value of this kind of approach, how it can help us be more commercial, more effective leaders, how we can ship more. Your advice when we left was, let's not actually have that conversation. Let's beg for forgiveness instead of asking for permission a little bit and just get started, which, as someone who has a little bit of a rule breaker flair within my genes, I personally love. But for those who are going, okay, that sounds good, but I kind of want to, run an MVP of my own here rather than diving in head first. What does that look like for the head of people, for the people team in this sort of scenario? What's something that could be maybe a little bit low risk, pretty high impact to run an MVP of their own?
I love that we're already using the product and language, right? So MVP, high impact.
It's happening.
Yeah, it's already in the works. So the most fundamental thing in product thinking is not talking in solutions and outcomes, is always exploring impact and underlying problems. And I think that's the biggest change we can make in Agile. So instead of talking about the processes I'm going to ship, talk about what am I trying to achieve. Just a thought, a different thought process. And I recommend to start with one process that you're already deciding to do, and really to pause and to do this exercise. And once you have it, and once you think about, okay, that's what I'm trying to do. We talked about a performance review example before. So in the previous episode, we talked about this example that the defined impact was to make sure in the next 6 months, all of the employees are the best version of themselves in order to reach the company goals. And maybe it's a different outcome. Maybe we have this problem that our best performers are leaving us. So maybe this performance cycle should be, how do I first identify and then retain my top performer? And that's the only goal. And then maybe the goal that I'm seeing is that we have a culture problem. We have some 1 or 2 or 3 toxic managers, and then we need to somehow overcome that, and we need to work on the way we give feedback, the way we receive feedback. So the first step would just to define what we're trying to achieve on one process. And then what I think can make really massive impact is not to keep it to yourself, but to share it. And I really love this concept of kickoff meeting. So before you launch something, so just, sit with whoever's relevant, leadership, relevant stakeholders in a room and kind of, present your plan. That's the impact I want to make. And that's the problems I identified. That's the timeline. And that's the plan. That's how success looks like. Very short deck lines, the entire thing. Embrace feedback, see how it works. And I believe that only this soul meeting and only this exercise really, really, really makes an impact, because That's what the C-suite like begs you to do, like talking business impact, ship incrementally, get my feedback. Also, that's something that's often really misunderstood. Just the ability of leadership to give feedback in a constructive way in a point in time that it's actually relevant, that's a struggle. Lots of times they really don't know how to do it because when they give feedback, it might people might get it, take it too seriously and implement what they understood, or maybe it's too late, so the feedback cannot be implemented. So only the time to give room to feedback when it actually can change outcomes is huge. And so I'll start with that.
Yeah, I love how, as you were kind of sharing some of these examples, really like, if I really think about it, a lot of this stuff tends to be happening in the business already for the people team in terms of things like, they might hear feedback about culture, but they might often take more of a role as a sounding board rather than someone who's using it and kind of quantifying it in the sense of a user interview and actually finding a way to apply some of that feedback. And so I wonder if actually the shift isn't really that intimidating or that big for a lot of teams who are probably already out there having a lot of these kinds of conversations out in the business, but have maybe just previously not had a great outlet for it or a great format to apply some of the conversations, categorize them, come up with quantities in terms of like how many of our users are feeling this certain way about a particular aspect of performance management or, of our leadership approach, things like that. It actually sounds like it's almost not too much of a shift. And really, it's just almost a formalization of something that's already happening in some respects to then be able to go from
Yeah.
having these conversations that in many ways don't feel like they're accomplishing a lot, except maybe short-term satisfaction for the person that's, raising the complaints or whatever it might be. And actually, we can turn this around into, okay, well, actually, here's a solution that we've potentially developed based on all this feedback and what we're hearing from the organization.
Yeah, I think that some concepts are fundamentally different. Like instead of shipping one perfect solution that you worked on for 6 months, ship incrementally. That's very radical shift, I think. But some concepts are just fine tuning, like you said. Instead of talking to people and ask them, "What do you think?" Ask them, "What did you do? How did you feel?" Um, so asking about behaviors, and then I think also what I said before, maybe kickoff meeting, maybe something that you already are doing. Maybe before you're doing a big process, you're doing some sort of a meeting. Okay. But how to run this meeting, how to create this framework where you own the room, where you own the impact. Um, how to show the timeline, how to show success, how to frame it in a way that lands. That's this fine tuning that can really, really, really change everything.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine it would have a pretty profound impact. Okay, so we're a team. We've maybe run, one or two of these kind of MVPs. We're pretty comfortable with the approach, that sort of a thing. What does maybe like a more broad scale rollout look like? So, I mean, some of the things that come to mind for me when I think of how product teams work or how engineering teams work or how the two interface is, terms like Agile and Scrum and all these sorts of things come to mind. When it comes to like the practices or like the week to week, month to month sort of rhythm that a team might have, where would you recommend for people teams start if they're looking to start to embed some of these things? What should they be looking at?
There are some uh, ceremonies or rituals that I found very helpful in just getting this rhythm of product mindset and execution mindset. So we talked about kickoff meeting, setting expectations, getting feedback, framing everything. Then I would also add this things bi-weekly, weekly, monthly, I don't know, depending on your company, but kind of this um, sync meeting where you just share what happened, what did I learn, what am I trying to do. So bite-sized version of Kickoff to share progress and get. Okay, do it when it's not too late. That's also a really good way to incorporate feedback, to show that you're leading it, that you're owning it, and to get more visibility in what you're doing. A lot of the time, working behind the scenes and no one knows about it. So that's also a very, very practical way, and that really helps. And the closing ceremony or ritual can be a summary. So looking back on, I don't know, the previous quarter, or looking back on the previous compensation cycle, performance cycle, or whatever, um, that are the goals. That's what we learned. That's what we achieved. That's what we didn't achieve. That's what we are taking and learning from the for the next rollout. And also asking, how did you find it? How do you think we can improve for next time? And so kind of doing these 3 ritual really, really, really help. Engineering teams and product teams do this kind of summary or retros every 2 weeks. So every 2 weeks we stop and we ask what worked, what didn't, what can we learn? And that fundamentally changes everything.
Yeah, I mean, I'm nodding my head for people who are only listening to the audio because, having worked in teams that I think adopted a lot of these sorts of ceremonies, the change that I saw was profound in terms of, as you said at the start of the cycle, what is it that we're setting out to achieve? I think it does such a phenomenal job of just making sure your alignment to your goals, and that, of course, your goals have been something that have been set based on the outcome we're trying to create for the business. It just creates real, crystal clarity around what it is we're trying to achieve. There's not, if you've got a team of more than a couple of people, it means people aren't going off and working on something that you're not aware of, or there's misalignment somewhere, distractions. Obviously, the big thing that can crop up. One of the ones that I wanted to throw in there as well, and again, this is from my experience, is I think that the formal term is a sprint review, but for me, again, for a function that so often has kind of operated in the dark, in the obscurity in the back office, is the sort of tradition. Being able to come out of a 2 or 4 or whatever week cycle and say, hey, here's the thing that we built for, for our users, for our employees, for our managers, and being able to share that with them is so profound. And having worked at a couple of companies that did that, the level of credibility it builds for your people team is enormous, because again, everyone has this kind of preconception around what it is that a HR team does. It's usually wrong, or it's baked in a very traditional kind of old school. So when you're saying to them, hey, we really want to create high performance. You're a high performer. You want to work with high performers. We want to make it clear what high performance looks like. We've built this thing based on your feedback and with that goal in mind. And here's how it works. I mean, it's, again, how many times, I'm sure it was like this for you, and you've interfaced with a lot of HR teams, right? Where it feels like sometimes they've created this solution that's made for them and it's not made for the user. So yeah, if there's one tip that I can throw in there, is do not be shy to share the accomplishments that you're making through an approach like this, because I just think it does wonders for a function like the people team.
And also the other way around. When you talked, I thought about it, that these processes also kind of bake in the fact that mistakes happen and things are not perfect. So instead of external people pointing fingers and saying, that's what you did wrong, and then the response is kind of always defensive, and you try to explain why everything is okay. When it's baked in the process, so when you do a quarterly summary and you say, these are the things that we need to learn from, and this is I'm going to improve. And when it's a part of the cadence of the actual team every 2 weeks, to actually say, okay, what didn't work well? And that's part of the agenda. That's always there. And that means things are not going as expected always. And that's fine. That's part of the plan. That's part of how things are. And that's very, very liberating. And I think it's the only way to really excel.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Again, nodding my head off over here. I mean, everyone obviously knows that I do a lot of work in the compensation space, and my experience is that often we put a lot of pressure on ourselves as people professionals to expect to get something as important as compensation perfectly right the first time, no mistakes. There's a lot of pressure, and I think you said something then that, yeah, exactly right. And you said something then that really resonates is that it takes such, a load of pressure off to be able to say, hey, we kind of had this goal in mind. Here's our first, version of it. We want to, we're gonna try it out. We want your feedback. We're going to try it. And it does two really amazing things in my experience. One is that it takes the pressure off the people team because they get to say, hey, we've given it our best first go, based on the feedback we've heard and the goal we have in mind and the resources we have available to us. We've created this solution that we think is great for you, but we want to hear from you. And then the other thing is that for the people, the users that are the recipients of this, they know that their feedback is going to be used to help drive an even better version next time. So rather than, again, the traditional experience where often it feels like HR have created this thing, it's actually for them, but it's being imposed on us. I don't have a way to give them feedback about how that's going to improve. I've got no say in how my compensation package or how the performance process, how any of these things can work for me. I'm just going to quietly sit over here and be upset about it. Instead, I know that if they say, hey, we're going to be running 10 user interviews, please put your hand up. And I've got something to say. I've now got an outlet to actually change this thing and the impact and the experience that I'm having at work. And I think it just creates such an incredible perspective for both sides. Less pressure for the HR team, a great opportunity to be a part of building something that's better, not only for yourself, but for your peers and your colleagues as an employee. So yeah, I couldn't agree more. This sort of a change just makes such a big difference in my experience.
And also from leadership perspective, like often when things, when you do a fuck up, we see it, right? We see it anyway. So
yeah,
that's
it. There's no hiding it, is there?
Just acknowledge it. Just own it. It gives so much more, confidence when someone say, yeah, I didn't do this well and I learned from it and I will fix it next time. It changes the whole thing. It changes the whole dynamic.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, we've obviously talked about a lot of different things that, are ways in which the success of a product-led approach can show up. I think we've talked a lot about, in particularly the sort of qualitative ways in which can show up. Whether it's those or there's other metrics or something like that, when it comes to, I guess, testing the health of an approach like this or getting a sense of whether or not it's working, what do you tend to look towards or see maybe people teams that are embedding these kinds of approaches? What do you see them do to signal that this is being successful so far?
I think that ironically, although this whole concept is very much data driven, I think, like the best way to see if this approach works or not, it's not about the numbers. Feel it, you see it. I like to think about KPIs is think about the problems you wanted to solve to begin with, and then that's a way to quantify if it actually worked or not. And so we talked about in the previous episode, we talked about the symptoms. When should I embrace this type of thinking? So we talked about, wasting lots of time on processes that don't do any impact. So the contrary of that, when you see that you're much more efficient in building processes and it actually doing the impact you wanted to do, or you're getting more invited to strategic, discussions and people actually ask for your opinion and they actually want to hear about it. And that's another great way to see that things are actually changing in the right direction. Or you mentioned it before, that when you worked in this way, suddenly your velocity was changes as a team. You shipped much, much more. So that's another syndrome And that's another outcome that you can see. We are doing more things, actually doing more initiative, more impact in the same amount of time. So I think that, and also the subtle thing of you just feel it. You just feel when you gain more credibility, more trust, more room to operate, without micromanaging and nitpicking. I think the opposite of trust is when your managers need to see all the time, everything that you are doing and kind of nitpick to every action because they don't trust you. So I think it's not measurable, but it's very much you can't not see. Okay, it's very obvious. And in terms, and if I will try to answer your question about data, I think it's not about the actual shift in product mindset, but in every process or every initiative you ship, you should be able to measure it. And so invest a lot of time in kind of quantifying the impact. Like I said before, like what did I try to get done? Why did I even start it in the first place? And how do I do it? So I don't know, if I wanted to prevent a top performer from leaving us, so I might measure the amount of top performer that left the company out unwillingly in the previous 6 months. And that would be my metric. And if I launched a new onboarding plan, so how many finished it successfully and launched their first real impactful initiative in the first 6 months. So if I'm doing an onboarding plan for developers, how many shipped a meaningful feature to all the users? And if I onboarded CS people, which percentage did, I don't know, a webinar?
Yeah.
And something meaningful like that. So I really don't like cookie cutter KPIs, measure, I don't know, turnover rate. I don't know.
Yeah.
It should be.
It's like, what's the targeted problem we're trying to solve, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, I hear you. So it's less about sort of measuring the success of the transition to this kind of approach. It's actually seeing the impact of this kind of an approach in the fact that probably beforehand you were, spinning your wheels a lot on tangible impact for these sorts of focuses, whereas now you're actually a lot more able to ship solutions that have an outcome and are going to see a measurable improvement on problem being solved, rather than it being an evaluation of the team's transition per se.
You won't need data. It will be so obvious.
Yeah, that's what I love to hear.
No need, just need 2 eyes.
I can imagine. And again, like I think I said this in pre-recording, like, as someone who's been through this experience myself, I can't more wholly support a shift like this, having had a majority of my career in an environment that didn't use these sorts of principles. And then kind of most recently in the last couple of roles that I was in, where I did, the difference is night and day in terms of the things you're delivering, the impact they have, the speed at which you're delivering. And not to mention, just like you said, the feeling that you leave with every day. I mean, I don't know how many times I used to leave, a previous HR jobs and kind of get to the end of the day and go, I have no idea what I did. It was like a lot of these little conversations and busy work and emails and meetings and whatever. And
the worst
and
feeling, right?
It is, right? Yeah, because I think as humans, we want to have an impact. Yeah. And to the contrary, these sorts of approaches, just left me, at the end of the day, knowing that, again, after a sprint review or something cool where I really got to talk about the impact of, or something that we've delivered, and to see the excitement on people's faces, rather than the sort of the traditional, like, oh no, HR's launched something again. So it's a huge impact. So I couldn't more strongly argue for teams to give this a try. All right, I'm gonna pivot a little bit towards AI. I'd be remiss for someone who's now the founder of an AI HR tech company not to broach the topic of AI. I got kind of a two-parter. One is like, I'm really curious what role you see AI playing in this kind of product-led approach. So, I mean, some of the things that come to mind for me are things like, I've heard of this concept of synthetic audiences. We've talked about user interviewing, things like that. But yeah, I'm just curious, what role do you see AI playing in a product-led approach for people teams?
Yeah, so I'm a little bit biased, I gotta admit. Uh, but on the top of my head, I can think about two things that can dramatically help. So one, just first of all, remove off your plate lots of the admin, repetitive, mundane work that just takes up tons of hours. So that alone is huge. Okay, so if AI, can automate contract signings and scheduling meetings and run some processes and draft policies, updating data, double checking data, pulling reports, all of these type of things, they take tons of hours. Okay, so just freeing up this time is a lot. And so that's one. And the second thing is that in order to be very effective in HR and doing product led approach, you gotta have data, and it's super challenging to get valuable data in HR because it's fragmented in lots of tools. You have onboarding data here, you have compensation data here, there like performance data there, engagement data there. It's very hard to understand a holistic view about a specific person, department, entire organization. It's nearly impossible. Only if you're, I don't know, data scientist. And in most organizations, they don't. It's not an available resource. In the best ones, you do have analysts dedicated for these type of things, but in most organizations, you don't. So the ability to make sense of it all and do it in a proactive way. So to surface insights about, hey, we have an issue with this person because their PTO pattern is weird. They take a lot of partial half days, and that might indicate, active job search. And also, we didn't give them a raise for 1.5 years, but they're top performers. So something is off about this person. Okay, so take care of them, or might flag specific risk in a specific office or department or manager. So being able to overhaul lots of data sources and connect the dots and surface them, something that wasn't possible before. And that can be very helpful in understanding opportunities and showing the impact.
Yeah, I love it. I don't know if I've talked about it on this podcast before necessarily, but the most recent role that I was in, one of the ways in which we were able to kind of carve out time to make sure we could, be responsible for the full remit of what a people operations or a HR team is responsible for, but also create the space to embed some of these product-led practices. What we did is we actually carved the team into, it was only a small team, but we separated the team into two halves. So we had an operations team, which dealt with a lot of the admin, the sort of, procedural type stuff. And we created another half of the team that focused on product, on building. And, I can really see, especially with tools like, how tools like Dream Team are shaping up, is that actually you could potentially just get to a point where you don't even have this kind of admin team and you're actually really just running as a full product team, which is an amazing, vision to be working towards as a tool and then potentially as a team as well, which is really exciting. All right, that's really cool. It's a future to be excited about. Personally, I'm excited about it. Any parting words around AI? I know I get asked oh, what do you think the future of work is, but with AI and things like that all the time. And oftentimes I'm just I have no idea because it's changing so quickly. But are
Changing
there
by the
any?
day.
Yeah, exactly. And it's changing so quickly as well, right? Like the last 2 years, there's been so much change. But yeah, any other like predictions, any other thoughts around, the role AI will play in the people team going forward?
I think the AI hype is starting to calm down a little bit in terms of it's less of hairs on fire, how do I get this AI stuff to operate AI type of initiatives? But it's more like, okay, how's my day to day look like? Where am I less efficient? Where am I more? And how can I use this technology to help? Okay, so starting with your actual day to day and your actual challenges, and then matching the right technology instead of just with all by all means do something with AI, which is what we have seen in the last, I think, a year or two.
Yeah, I think it's been a little bit of a case of drinking from the fire hose, but maybe it speaks to. I'm curious on your thoughts here, whether or not the general AI literacy has reached a level where I think people can maybe more quickly evaluate whether or not something is going to be effective, or if they know, hey, I have reviewed my day or my week or my work process, and actually I think there's a way AI could play a role here. Do you see that as being some of the reason?
Yeah, I think that two things happen in parallel. One, like you said, the AI literacy rise. So people already know more tools, more techniques like how to write a better prompt. Also, when you don't need to invent the wheel and when you can just take off the shelf technology that can do the work for you. And the second thing that I think happened is that a lot of this initiative fell flat. Like it didn't work. It failed. And so lots of resources, lots of time, lots of money, and no outcome. And then people team started to ask, okay, how can I do things differently? And so yeah, the huge potential and also how to avoid yeah, just like we talked before, how to avoid massive investment with no impact. So going back to the root, what did they try to achieve? What was the problem? So kind of, I think, implementing product thinking in this aspect as well can massively help.
Amazing. Well, Shirley, thank you so much for joining me. We've covered an immense amount of, not just the last episode, but this one as well. We've talked about how teams can get started in a small way if they're thinking about adopting product-led principles. We've talked about what that looks like if they do decide, actually, yeah, it's pretty obvious this is working. What is widespread adoption? What does widespread rollout look like? We've talked about how, the case kind of makes itself in terms of the impact that you're having with these sorts of approaches. And obviously we had the pleasure of kind of finishing up with a little bit of an eye to the future in a world where potentially there's HR teams that have no admin, which is one that I am here for. So thank you so much for joining me. And I appreciate all of your insights. It's been an amazing discussion.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us on another edition of the Foundation Series. Make sure to head over to our website to subscribe to the Foundation Series for monthly editions featuring future interviews on startup compensation. In each edition, we'll explore the different strategies, trends, and challenges faced by startups around the world. If you have a burning topic you'd like me to cover or a standout guest that you want to hear from, drop me an email so I can dive deeper into the compensation topics that matter most to you. Join me next time as we continue to uncover the strategies and practices driving success in global tech startups around the world. Thanks for listening.